Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Warm welcome to all of you on behalf of APAC News Network, and a warm welcome to Sandeep Bhargava. He's the MD of Rackspace, who is with us for today's session. Just for briefly, APAC News Network, we are a media organization headquartered out of Noida and with a pan-Indian as well as presence outside India in Malaysia, Singapore, and Dubai. We primarily focus across governance, healthcare, education, BFSI, IT enterprise, as well as the startups and SMEs. And we reach out in a 360-degree mode through video interviews, through portals, through print magazine, and through different other social media sources also. So primarily, we have Sandeep today, and Sandeep, what we would like to discuss is basically on genesis of Rackspace, the solutions and services in your portfolio. How do you address the different verticals? What are the use cases there in terms of product growth, inorganically and organically? How you are looking at growth? What are the new services on the anvil? So maybe the best way to start would be if you can take us a little bit through the genesis of Rackspace.
Sure. Rackspace is a San Antonio, Texas-based company. We've been in existence since the late 90s. So this is really, in some ways our fourth decade or third decade in the business. Uh, we started as web hosting, evolved into private cloud, and now we've slowly moved into the multi-cloud environment. What we focus on is helping customers find the right workloads. One is help them migrate, manage, optimize, and then secure those workloads. That's what we really focus on. And when I say multi-cloud, we have a wide network of data centers and private cloud environments all across the globe, as well as we help customers on Microsoft, Amazon, and Google platforms.
Okay.
And from a number perspective, we are about $2.9 billion company, across all the four continents.
Okay, thanks. Primarily, since you mentioned you are a multi-cloud provider, and what we have seen is, especially in the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, many of the enterprises are migrating towards cloud, and this multi-cloud environment where typically they will have maybe a host of public cloud providers, the Microsofts and Google, Amazon. They then certain applications on their private cloud, and this typical multi-cloud management. So, in terms of, but at the same time during this pandemic, we have seen the workload patterns of these enterprises have also changed. It's largely a work from anywhere kind of workforce. One, how did you help enterprises towards this multi-cloud migration, especially in the last 2.5 years? And second is this changing pattern of workloads. How did you sort of reconcile with that?
Yeah, good question. First of all, what we've seen is the acceleration to cloud, and really the move towards digital transformation has really gathered pace all across, right? And there are multiple factors to it. It was about providing business continuity. It was about being able to access the applications from anywhere. It was about the feeling that your own data centers was not really secure when you can't even reach them, on time to do things, right? And then as supply chains across the world, especially in tech, become tighter and tighter, you may not even be able to get the right parts or the right equipment as you want to refresh your environments, right? And so, for all those reasons, plus a lot of different business models emerged, with the amount of money that is flowing in the world's economy, a lot of new ideas gained funding, and a lot of new people started businesses, and they became really successful. And some of it had to do with how we were consuming things uh, in the COVID world, right? Businesses kind of got started, and when they started, they really started on what was the most modern of technologies, which were easier to use, easier to consume, which was cloud, right? So we've helped customers in the enterprise space. So companies who've been established for a long period of time migrate to one of the cloud platforms, either one of those. We've helped startups, as they kind of get started, and as they focus from away from product development into marketing and making sure that they have a very reliable customer base. How do we make sure that the technical debt that they might have built up is taken care of? And a third segment would be people who've created software for a variety of users. How does that get ported over to public cloud platforms? So that is how we've in different parts of the economy, different kinds of customers we've helped. And initially it was all about migration, but as you move to cloud, unless you have the right optimization strategies and you continuously uh, check and act on them, your public cloud expenditure can also balloon and your technical debt can start building it. So we've helped a lot of customers with that optimization, and then of course with that management, and with all of that plus the move from work from home and remote access comes all the security challenges, right? So those are the things and the areas that we've helped customers with during this COVID period over the last 2.5 years.
Okay, thanks. So, if you can elaborate, these are the two you mentioned the critical points, especially in any multi cloud environment. The critical points are the optimization and ensuring that organization manages maximum productivity in that multi cloud environment. The second is obviously security, again a critical concern. And the third, if I may say, is the manageability, as you are handling maybe both public and private clouds from multiple vendors with some underlying software also, which helps in managing. So, again, keeping in mind the last 2.5 years, what has been the biggest challenges you have seen for the CIOs from that perspective, and what has Rackspace done to sort of help, especially if you can speak more in the Indian context?
Yep. And see, yeah, and I would separate the customer base into two, like traditional enterprises and kind of enterprises that are, or companies that are just starting up, which is really the startups, right? Um, in the Indian context, and by the way, the Indian context is no different than, let's say, a Southeast Asian context or an Australian context. Uh, However, with the where India was in terms of adoption, I would say the pace of change in India has been much, much faster than in some of the other places, right? And of course, it's a large market that has enticed all the hyperscalers to set up local domains, which means then the local adoption of solutions become even more easier, right? And so that has a network effect on the number of people and number of customers who are migrating to cloud, right? So I would say the needs of an Indian business is no different than what we see anywhere else. Uh, but the pace at which Indian customers have adopted is much faster, right, than most markets. Uh, on the coming to the CIO front, right? If you look at the enterprises, uh, there have been the challenges for CIOs is one, uh, how many technologies should they be on, right? Uh, they don't really have to justify anymore why they should move to cloud. The boards are asking, why are you not on cloud, right? And when that happens, so they have a strategy. And then the larger enterprises, the boards are also saying, do you want to put all your eggs in one basket? Have you thought about continuity, and should you be on one? Why not on many, right? So people have to grapple with that question, and how do you answer that? Related to that is really the skills, right? So as people and as customers have moved onto public cloud domains, it has also meant that you have to grow those skills much faster than what your traditional IT departments have been used to, right? And imagine if you are on multi-cloud, which is two or more hyperscalers. That means that you have to have IT skills uh, or technology skills in your teams, and you have to grow them. Now, in a normal world, it would have been all okay, but in a world where everybody wants to get to cloud, right? Everybody, a lot of young people, a lot of entrepreneurs are building up, starting their own companies. Suddenly, the talent shortage, or talent who has become really scarce and really high in demand. That is something that we see in India. India is known for its software and technology skills, but paucity always was about serving US and European customers. Now, to add to that, there is a high enough demand to serve the Indian market itself, right? And what that has meant is that the scarcity of talent in India uh, is something that the CIOs have to worry about, because they have moved into that platform, but where are the people who will actually help, them be sustainable, right? The third thing is, they have to really learn or relearn new things, new principles, right? Like security, like continuous optimization, and that is a discipline and governance that they have to put in, because it's slightly different than when you are in your own data center. And I would say a fourth one for CIOs then is really thinking about how do they get the best use of the cloud technologies without locking themselves too deeply into any particular technology. And that's where cloud native technologies come in. And how do you then change or modulate your application environment to take care of those cloud native technologies? So that's really on the big enterprise side, right? And then on the startup side, it is all about, again, a scarcity of resources, because they are also competing you know with all kinds of companies. It is about making sure that you have a handle on your architectural integrity and the keys to your architecture, right? And as you move into public cloud, it's no longer that you have a set of servers sitting in your farm and you can take care of it, right? It's sitting somewhere. You have to have the keys. And if you lose people with those keys, suddenly your whole uh, you know development environment could be locked out, right? So those that is has been a big worry. How do you maintain continuity in an environment where people will move? Uh, how do you make sure that that is taken care of? And that's what those are the two things that we see uh, in startups. And the third thing really is when you're starting a business, you put in your credit card, you start coding, you start writing an app. You don't really think too much about it. But as you grow, and as you start acquiring customers, that's when you realize that those customers are saying, are you secure? Is my data secure? If you are selling to enterprises, it's all about, are you following the right compliance models? Do you have the right certifications? And that's when the startups start figuring out who are the people who would help them. And of course, it all again comes back to the underlying infrastructure and the architecture you've deployed. So two different segments, some common needs, some common challenges across both.
Okay, thanks. So, taking a cue from what you mentioned right now, uh, while earlier we talked about the technical or the technology aspects the security or the optimization or the manageability. What you mention, and this I would say would be maybe partially common between large enterprises and the startups. One part is a compliance issue, especially the challenges. There are now, again, you are handling multi-cloud from multiple vendors. Your business itself might be multiple businesses, and each business might have its own regulations and other regulatory compliances which you need to conform to. So, in that multi compliance environment, how do you help? It can be either enterprises or startups manage. That is one part. And the other aspect, which is more a business aspect, is again in this multi-cloud environment, multiple vendor scenario, there are multiple SLAs. So these multiple SLAs, again reconciling them or managing them simultaneously is a challenge. How do you help organizations manage
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So, a good question. On the compliance front, traditionally, the enterprises are simpler because they have they have dealt with compliances for a long time, right? They have the frameworks. It's just fitting those new technologies and new ways into the existing frameworks, right? Understanding that using the public cloud platforms to innovate, to try and do new things is very easy, and any part of the corporation can do it, right? So, how do you govern in that? Uh, is what needs to be laid out. But the requirements of governance, the basic frameworks are all there, right? And people are pretty familiar with it. In the startup world, even traditionally the word compliance starts entering in only when the customer acquisition starts, right? So it is more of a reaction to an event, and where we come in is we have frameworks against which we can look at any environment, uh, and depending on which country you're operating in and what local regulations are there around data privacy, around security uh, compliances, around monetary authority compliances, and so on. So we have the checklist where we can come in and work with startups to kind of fill it up, to figure out where are the areas that they need to strengthen, uh, and what is then the action plan that they need to take. It is relatively simple because they have been told by their board or by one of the major customers that this needs to be done. So it's an easier job. It's a faster job. But then all whether the challenges is the underlying technology sometimes needs to be tightened, and for startups that takes time and energy because you don't really want to be spending time in correcting something. You want to be spending time on continuous development and acquiring new customers, right? So they have to do the trade-off in the limited time period that they have. So that's something that we help the startups on. Uh, and like I said, on the corporate side, it's kind of simpler, right? So that was really around the compliances. And your other question was around multi
Around SLAs,
around
the
SLAs.
multi.
Yeah, yeah. And so the first thing is to understand what are the kind of service levels the various hyperscalers are giving, and what does it actually translate into, right? Because there are fine nuances, uh, and customers don't really have that much of a choice because you are buying something which is used by many other customers. So it is not something that is going to be tailored for you. Now, in that environment, when you are crafting services, it is important to understand these nuances and figuring out, let's say, what the downtimes would be, what the response times would be, and ensuring that you are putting in a service governance framework and service architecture which will actually help respond and resolve the problems, right? And this is where somebody who understands multi-cloud, somebody who has a relationship with hyperscalers, somebody who's invested in supporting these platforms would know how do you get the resolutions, what are the processes to follow um, in the desired time, and what are the other recourses, right? So that is something that we work with customers, when they're using multiple technologies. The other aspect of it is more around really the new need to use multiple technologies, and how your application framework will work, right? If your application is on one platform, your data is on another, you know, what will the latency be? What are the connection charges you will pay? What happens if that link severes? We work with the customers to really understand that, and in a lot of cases, the answer might be that you actually don't need to be on multi-cloud. You know, just use one technology and go over. Right now, it's easy on for smaller customers. It's much more difficult for large enterprises who have a sprawling, tech stack and which has been built up over a period of time.
Okay, that's a very interesting observation. From the compliances front, it's easier for the larger companies, it's a challenge for the smaller ones. Regarding the SLAs, it's the contrary. So now coming more to Rackspace specifically. Uh, this supporting multi-cloud management, how would you differentiate yourself from competition, say the likes of a Nutanix, or maybe how would you differentiate? What would be your USPs?
Yeah, so I guess our USP is really, a couple of points. So one is a global scale. We are a publicly listed company, which means we are not going to disappear anywhere. We are, in many countries. Our delivery model is such that we are present and delivering from many places, right? So that's one. The second is building capabilities in multiple cloud technologies and building competency in each of those cloud technologies, or in each of the hyperscaler across the uh, different areas. Like, for example, security or data or migrations, right? Across the platforms. Uh, each of these mean that you have to hire that many number of people. You have to train. You have to keep investing in certifications, and a lot of companies can, especially the smaller ones, can do for one. Like majority of our competitors are really, can have them enough mental and management bandwidth to really invest in one, right? Um, Doing it across two or three becomes really difficult, and that's where we play in. Now, of course, we have then the much larger global integrators like an Accenture or a DXC, right? And of course, they have the scale to invest in multiple technologies. Um, where Rackspace's sweet spot is we are really in that mid-market commercial segment in companies which are between 300 million to 3 billion. That is where we play, and that is where we come across smaller firms, and you know our USP is really our ability to invest and train resources and get certified on multiple cloud technologies across the various hyperscalers.
Okay. Again, specifically looking at the India market, one you mentioned about the competencies that you. So, if you can indicate specifically what are these competencies and are they available? All of these are available in the India market. One, and second is your own infrastructure wise. It can be both in terms of the data center and other facilities, as well as in terms of manpower. How are your resources panned out in across India?
Yeah. So, first of all, from a delivery capability perspective, I think about one third of our company is based out of India. So we service global customers, but not only that, we serve a number of Indian customers. Indian customers who are present in India, Indian customers who have customers in US, right? So we service all of them with the the number of people that we have in India. Uh, from a competency perspective, I would say, in Amazon and Microsoft, the number of competencies that they have, we have pretty much certifications and all. And in India, we have, like, I would say 80 to 90% of all those competencies. So a competency, for example, could be, security, right? Or it could be data analytics, uh, or it could be migration, or it could be AI ML, right? So, those are the competencies, especially across our platform and in Amazon. Uh, we have that, and we have that in India. And then, the final piece is really the data centers, our own. So in Asia Pacific, we have our data centers in Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia. Right now, we have no plans to build uh, a data center or create a private cloud platform in India. Our India strategy is all about working with the hyperscalers. But we do have data centers and private cloud environments, across the globe, and some very interesting solution sets on those.
Then here one question is, though you have the hyperscalers, but regarding the Indian customers, in certain cases there are requirement that the Indian company, the data needs to be hosted within the India geography. So if you are not having data centers here, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so that is why we do not really deal with those customers or those customer profiles who want a more of a private cloud solution with data residence in India. We don't really deal with that segment. Most of our Indian customers who use our private cloud environments are customers who have other customers in US or Europe. They're selling to US or Europe. They need private cloud environments, and they're using our US and European centers.
Okay, so then just a natural corollary of that question is, one, overall, I would want to understand what is your go-to-market strategy in India, and do you work in alliance with one of these data center providers? These lot of these third-party data center providers are there. So do you work in consortium mode with them? And overall, what sort of go-to-market strategy you have for India?
Yeah. So we have a full-fledged team in India, with sales, pre-sales, professional services, and service delivery. Really spread out. It's actually really spread out across Bangalore, Hyderabad, Delhi, um, Pune, and Mumbai. So we are across many cities, and our focus is really helping customers migrate to public cloud providers. So an Amazon or a Microsoft or Google, right? Uh, so that's why we don't really work with data center providers, because we don't really have an intention to get into a private cloud environment.
Okay. And obviously, you also mentioned earlier, and most of the, if I may say, mid-size enterprises who look to move towards these public cloud platforms. So, if you can indicate in terms of your customer profile, and what sort of use cases are there?
Yeah. So we have customers. I would say we have large enterprises where we've helped customers migrate to one of the public cloud platforms, and we manage those environments and optimize those environments. We have customers in the startup segment, and there, it's all about doing that compliance checks and governance checks and helping them reduce their technical debt. And beyond that, then it's really getting them the right resources to do infrastructure management, so that they can focus their energies on app and platform development, right? Uh, and then in the mid-sized uh, companies, it is really about doing a thorough assessment of their current data center footprint and figuring out what is the best strategy for them to consume public cloud, and which is the right public cloud to be.
So typically for these mid-sized clients, especially again in the Indian context, budgetary constraint is a big challenge. So in this migration support that you help them with, how do you manage that for these mid-sized customers?
True, no, it is right. It is a challenge for them, and so we have to be cost competitive, which means when we create a delivery capability, it has to be able to operate at the price points that the Indian customers can afford, right? It is not something that that you could deal with what you could do in US and Europe. Um, the second thing is, there's quite a bit of funding available from the public cloud providers because they are enticing customers to move to their platform, and they do underwrite quite a bit of migration effort that the partners might, right? And it is it is to know what funding mechanisms are available and how do you maximize those fundings for the customer, so that actually customers don't really need to pay that much, and it becomes more, you know they can get a faster rate of return by moving to cloud.
Okay, and what's just a previous thing which I wanted to know, if we look at the large public cloud providers, the Azure's, AWS, or Google, and you're working, see, normally what we have seen is there are specific partners who work with either one of them and sort of become an either an AWS partner or an Azure partner in that way. Since you are
Correct.
working with all of them, so this conflict of interest in terms of the deployment and especially for these mid-sized enterprises, it's ultimately your recommendation. They themselves might not have that much savvy or awareness about which public cloud provider to choose from. So how do you manage that?
Yeah. So the sales muscle of each of the hyperscalers is pretty well developed, right? If you had asked me this question 5 years ago, you know that was true, but each of the hyperscalers have invested in sales and marketing, uh, and they are there out there influencing customers, right? Uh, so a lot of times when we get into an engagement, the customer has been influenced one way or the other, has made up their mind, and now it's a question of how do you get behind and actually deliver. And it's slightly, this is kind of the uniqueness in India right now, because digital transformation is just starting, right? And there's lots of white space versus, let's say, in Australia, uh, where the customers are much more savvy. The third party consultants play a bigger role, right? In figuring out which is the best, right? Here, the hyperscalers, because of the sales muscle, have already influenced. The second thing is, it's about figuring out the use cases, figuring out our strengths, and figuring out like where people are, having the best impact. Is figuring that out and then sticking with a particular hyperscaler, right? It could be, you know, an industry vertical with one. It could be a particular competency with one, right? So we do our work, homework, and when we are there, then we are very clear. If you're going in a particular area, it's with a particular hyperscaler, and there is no conflict of interest. In fact, we have turned down deals because we had gone with one, the customer chose another, and just to make sure that we maintain the relationship, uh, we turned down, and then there was another partner who would do that work.
Okay. In terms of this is maybe one of the last questions. In terms of, if I may ask, Rackspace key focus areas for the next 2 to 3 quarters, and this can be in terms of expansion, either through inorganically through acquisition, or in terms of service lines, addition of service lines, or geographical expansion, but what are going to be some of your key focus areas for the next few quarters?
Yeah, so we just completed an acquisition actually in Singapore. Yeah, it's a Singaporean company, but the founders are all Indian, um, and it's in data on Azure. So in India, we've seen tremendous growth in the last 2 years. From pretty much very limited business, now it has become the third largest country for us in the region. Uh, and the intent is really we double down and now really make the most out of the investments that we made in India over the last 2 years, right? The sales force that we have in India is second largest after our largest market, which is Australia. We've got a full complement of team. We have a shared delivery center that is much more happy to help grow India business, right? So we have the local leadership and that local support for us, right? That is going, and it's really about how now we maximize. From a focus area perspective, it is really helping customers migrate. So migration, particular, Windows workloads, SAP workloads. So these are the workloads. Migrating them to public cloud platforms is definitely one. Doing cloud native app development, app modernization is a second, and then along with in that area we have some really good media streaming solutions, IoT, and the third aspect is around data. The company that we acquired, it is pretty strong in uh, data modernization, data platform, data lakes modernization, reporting, insight, and then finally data governance, right? And that is something that we will be bringing to India um, to expand our footprint here. Those are really the things and our plans for India over the next 12 months.
Thanks a lot. That was very informative, and thank you for taking your time out for this
Thank you.
session.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank you.
you.